Aloha, everyone, and welcome to this Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Informal Senior Officials Meeting, or ISOM, hosted news conference being webcast from the East-West Center here in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I'm Suzanne Vares-Lum, president of the East-West Center, and it is my honor to be moderating today. We are an education, research, and exchange institution headquartered here in Hawaii, and also an office in Washington, D.C., focusing on Asia and Pacific, including the United States. And we have been delighted to once again host the APEC ISOM meeting in our International Conference Center over the last 3 days. I'll introduce the speakers and ask them to make brief introductory remarks, then we'll get right to your questions. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Mike Pyle, to my right, is the 2023 APEC Senior Officials Meeting Chair and the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics. We're so happy to have you here, Mike. And next to him is Matt Murray, who is the Senior Official for APEC and a Senior Foreign Service Officer who has previously held other high-level positions related to trade and economics. And next to him is Dr. Rebecca Fatima Santamaria, and is the executive director of the APEC Secretariat in Singapore and a former trade negotiation for Malaysia. So happy to have you here as well. So I'd first like to start and invite each of you to offer a few brief introductory remarks, starting with you, Mike, and then Matt, and then Rebecca. So over to you, Mike. Thank you, President Susie.
So we've been here together for the last 3 days for the first and the informal senior officials meeting for the United States 2023 host year of APEC. With thanks to President Susie and her hospitality, with thanks to the people of Honolulu and the state of Hawaii, it's been, I think, a very successful few days. I might just offer a few observations or remarks, kind of taking a step back and then drilling into what we've accomplished here over the past 3 days. You know, if you roll the clock back just a handful of weeks, President Biden came into November with the G20, with APEC on the calendar, with a kind of two-part strategy for how to think about those multilateral engagements. One, he wanted to rally the world to condemn in the strongest possible terms Russia's immoral invasion of Ukraine, and for the world to acknowledge the economic costs that Russia's war was imposing on the rest of the world through food insecurity, energy security, much else, particularly the costs of Russia's war to emerging economies and developing economies. Secondly, he wanted to speak to an affirmative agenda to address those concerns, as well as to build a more sustainable and resilient economy for the world as a whole, but again, particularly for emerging and developing economies coming out of those engagements. I think that we thought after APEC, after the G20 last month, again, with great thanks to Thailand in the case of APEC, with great thanks to Indonesia in the case of the G20, that both of those goals had really significantly been advanced. Got very strong language in both those summits, again, condemning Russia's war, condemning the implications of Russia's war in terms of pressures on the global economy, particularly for emerging economies that we saw, and also beginning to take steps in the direction of an action plan to address worries around energy security, food security, debt, trade, climate, broad supply chain resilience, a real action plan that could speak to the needs of the world and the needs of emerging economies in this region of the world with clarity and strength. And so I think as we've come in and taken the baton on APEC from Thailand, again, on the basis of their extremely strong host year and summit in Bangkok last month, we recognize those accomplishments. recognize that we're now starting on a strong foundation to really turn our attention to acting on and taking steps in the direction of delivering on the action plan that the president articulated last month, and around which we saw a lot of coalescence in multilateral forums like APEC. And that's what this forum was really about the last 3 days. It was about coming together with our fellow member economies of APEC, about beginning to articulate a set of priorities or themes or goals that we want to advance for the year, but then really in particular, hearing from representatives of those economies, in particular, the emerging and developing economies that are part of the Asia Pacific region, around what steps we can take together that would most directly address or advance those broad concerns that we've been articulating, again, around energy and food security, around the need longer term for innovation and sustainability and inclusiveness. And I think it was a very productive 3 days where we got a lot of consensus around those broad priorities or goals, a lot of feedback on how we can concretely advance those goals over the course of our host year. And I think we're going to be taking that feedback on board, having listened very intently for 3 days, as we now do the hard work of really beginning to formulate that concrete action plan and building consensus around it across the full breadth of our fellow members of APEC. So that's really where we've been. It's really that's I think a fair summary of what we've done the last 3 days, and I think it highlights where we're going from here. And with that, I'll hand it off to Matt.
Great. Well, thank you very much, President Susie and everybody in the East West Center. It's just been an amazing 3 days here, and we, as Mike has said, this has been a terrific place to launch our U.S. host year for APEC. We last hosted APEC in 2011. And in 2011, the APEC leaders meeting was held here in Honolulu. So we thought there was really no better place to launch our 2023 host year than to come back here to the East West Center and have our informal senior officials meeting. 2023 will also be the 30th anniversary of the very first APEC leaders meeting, which was held also in the United States in Blake Island, Washington. And so, we're excited about the opportunity to, as Mike said, take the baton, in what will be the 30th anniversary of that meeting, which really lifted up and raised the ambition of what APEC can really do for the region. Obviously, the whole region, the whole Asia Pacific region has gone through a number of really challenging situations in the last few years. The COVID pandemic and the economic cost of that. As Mike noted, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are supply chain challenges. There's obviously, there's a climate crisis. There are health systems issues. There are food security issues. And so, Secretary Blinken has talked about, he talked in Bangkok about how can we work in APEC to meet the moment that we're in? How can we really, work with our partners and move forward on an ambitious agenda where we can see APEC as a really important piece of our economic recovery and moving on into the future. We are very grateful to Thailand. I had the privilege of coming into this role as U.S. senior official back in February at the very start of Thailand's host year. And, Thailand did a tremendous job of really advancing, an ambitious agenda, particularly focused on sustainability. And I think one of the things that's really struck us this year in APEC is just the degree to which there's a lot of interest and a lot of, coalescence of views around sustainability as a very important issue in the region, as well as inclusivity. And we certainly want to use our U.S. host year to continue to build on that and to continue to advance that, while also being able to demonstrate some of the best practices we have here in the United States on sustainability and on inclusion. We very much want our calendar of events to reflect the diversity of the United States. And so we were very excited to come to Honolulu to engage with local communities, to visit a local school, to bring in local Hawaiian native speakers to our symposium, and really learn from the people of Hawaii and how we can, take some inspiration from that as we go forward into our APEC host year. And we want to do the same thing when we hold meetings in February in Palm Springs, when we hold meetings in May in Detroit, when we hold meetings in August in Seattle, and then when we hold the Leaders Week in November in San Francisco. It's just a tremendous opportunity for the United States to serve in that role as the host economy for APEC. And so we're very honored to have this opportunity, and it's been a great few days here to get us started. And with that, I want to pass it over to Dr. Rebecca from the APEC Secretariat.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, President Susie, for this opportunity to speak to you. Very briefly, we're here in Hawaii, and we're really blessed to be here to just get an impression of what we can expect from the US for this year, for the coming year rather. We heard your vision for APEC, how you will align your priorities with what we've done in the past few initiatives, the past economies that were chair of APEC set the stage, and we'll see how the US continues those initiatives. Very importantly, the vision, the Putujaya vision that we set for ourselves for to achieve the community for 2040. We also will be following through the work that we're doing coming year will dovetail with the work that we set out for ourselves in the Aotearoa Plan of Action to implement the vision. And of course, the Bangkok goals for the biocircular economy. And being here in Hawaii was very interesting in the symposium as we interacted with the young people, leaders of communities and the private sector on how the biocircular economy itself is happening here in Hawaii, and being with a local school and interacting with the students to see how that's happening on the ground. So these are not just concepts, but what we saw in Hawaii is really how these big initiatives and ambitions are being translated and becoming real on the ground, and how the young are assimilating these values and these initiatives. So for me, all these just will enrich our conversation in APEC as we go forward and provide the tailwinds that we need so badly during these challenging times. So thank you, and I look forward to engaging with members of the media. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. And thank you all for your opening remarks. So now let's get to your questions. Once again, we'll be taking questions from the online audience only. You can type them into the chat or click the raise hand button if you want to speak on camera. And we have quite a few participants here, so please keep your questions brief and to the point. It's likely that we won't be able to get to everyone's questions, so we'll be posting press contacts in the chat if you want to follow up with them on a question. And again, you have the ability to record the video session to your device, and we will have recorded video up on our East West Center YouTube channel following the news conference. So let's get started with a question that came in via email. And this is for Matt and or Mike from Tim Lynch from the KPFA radio in Berkeley, California. And the question is, most Americans don't have a clear idea of what APEC is or does. How do you plan to interest and educate them?
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. I think you've hit on a really important point. For us, as we look at our APEC host year opportunity, we see that we have really two audiences. We have our audience that's in the region, the other economies that we engage on these issues on a regular basis through APEC. But it's also critically important that we engage our audience and our stakeholders here at home in the United States, because really, speaking as a U.S. official, if we're not able to, share some of the gains of the economic prosperity that comes out of these kinds of meetings and these kinds of processes in APEC with our, with our U.S. citizens, then we really will have missed an opportunity. I think that, our theme for this year is creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. And I think we need to really take forward all of the various priorities to really try to make that real in how we can engage, APEC to try to advance that theme and to try to make that a reality. But to your point, I think we need to do a lot of stakeholder engagement domestically in order to make that happen. So I was really excited that we were here when we were here this week. We were able to, bring some of the local experts into our symposium. We were able to go visit a school. I've certainly, in my role, made it a big priority over the last several months to do stakeholder engagements, either virtually or in person, around the United States. And that's going to continue to be a priority for us, not only for me to do that, but for other members of our broader team to do that. It's important for us to do that with the private sector, but it's also important for us to do that with broader stakeholders, including civil society and students and researchers and entrepreneurs and workers, importantly, and everybody who really is a part of the economy. And so we're going to endeavor to do that to the greatest extent possible. And you're right, we need to be able to explain very clearly, what APEC brings to us here in the United States, and how then creating more advanced economic opportunity in the region can also benefit the United States.
Thanks so much, Matt. So our next question is for any of the panelists. And it comes from here in Honolulu from Michael Shapiro at Hanaho Magazine. And you kind of touched on some of his questions. So if anyone wants to add, can you elaborate on how holding ISOM in Hawaii informed or shaped the APEC agenda for this year?
Maybe I'll offer a few thoughts, really building off of what Matt said. I think one of the things that was really constructive about the last 3 days was hearing from individual voices who are ultimately the people that APEC and the APEC economies have to serve, whether it be students, whether it be young leaders, whether it be women leaders, whether it be leaders who are leading on the green transition. Ultimately, those individual voices are the ones that we need to lift up, the ones that we need to listen to, the ones that we need to be bringing along as we as the host country, but also among APEC economies and APEC senior officials writ large. We need to be sure that as we're developing an agenda, developing a set of action items for this year, that we're keeping those voices that we heard here in Hawaii locally squarely in mind to make sure that we're delivering for them as examples of what it means to deliver for the Asia Pacific region as a whole.
Yeah, I think what also came through is how it provided us the conversations that we've had this last few days, especially with the community and the students, really helps us to frame how we will translate all these big ideas into relevant initiatives for the folks on the ground. How do we make this really matter to the folks? Because we keep saying that APEC's initiatives are to benefit everybody and for all generations. So, but how do you do that? And here in Hawaii, we really got an insight into how things are being done at the community level, at the school level. And this will really help us will help inform the work that we're doing, as well as help us frame all those conversations, those policy conversations that we will be having.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. Thank you, Mike. Now we have a live question. And I'd like to call on Suzanne Max, if you could tell us where you're from and who you direct the question to.
Okay, yes, I'm going to leave this open. I'm Suzanne Max, and I'm with World Team Now, nonprofit. I'm based in normally New York and California, but I'm living right now in Kauai. And I have a couple of questions, and whoever wants to go at it, I'm open to that. Are there efforts right now in place to make like a World's Fair, like we had the APEC and launching in 1989 in Fukuoka, Kyushu with Yokotopia, the Asian Pacific Expo? And are there any kind of events with those kind of expos planned in the US? And if so, where will they take place, and will Blake Island be a part of it? And how will the SDGs be incorporated into APEC? That's kind of a second question. In terms of how right now, are there plans and events being coordinated to bring attention to the global South trade situation and the importance of APEC with public perception in the global North? So I want to know about the SDGs specifically, and APEC's agenda related to the SDGs. And also, I wanted to know how come there is limited information at this juncture about APEC's importance and the upcoming activities and location for APEC in the United States. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to take a few of those? There's several questions there.
Yeah, hi, thank you for the questions. I think I'll take them in reverse order if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think on the limited information, we're working very hard the last couple of months to push out the information as we finalize decisions on our APEC host year. So I would certainly want to direct you to the State Department webpage, state.gov, where we've posted several different APEC announcements about where the sites of our meetings are and what the goals of some of those meetings are. We've also launched a US APEC LinkedIn site, where we're also posting a number of our different press releases and information and things that are available there. And so this is one thing that we definitely, I think back to the first question about how we can engage domestic stakeholders. Part of that is making sure that we have good communications where we're really pushing out and talking about what we're doing in APEC as the United States, but also collectively as an organization. On your question regarding the SDGs, I think that Thailand in its host year, we've talked about their biocircular green economy model. We're not working directly with the SDGs, but a lot of the SDGs are embedded in that document. And so that's another document that's available in terms of, it's called the Bangkok Goals on the Biocircular Green Economy. And that in that document, I think you'll find there's a lot of connectivity with the SDGs and many of the same environmental sustainability focal points. So I would definitely commend that to you. And then with respect to World's Fairs, I don't think there's a connection there between with APEC. Certainly there are other World Expos around the region and that are being bid on for different times, but that's not related to what we're doing.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have our next question. Thank you, Suzanne. Our next question is for any of our speakers from David Kwok at Pacifica Publishing in Malaysia. What can APEC do this year to help stabilize economic conditions in the wake of the pandemic?
So maybe I'll go ahead and take that. I think when you look at the set of themes that we've articulated coming into our host year around innovation, around interconnectedness, around sustainability, as an overarching goal, it really speaks to, I think, what it means to have a global economy that's still emerging from the pandemic, what it means to have an Asia Pacific regional economy that's in the same, for which the same is true. And I think one of the places where you really see the conversation zeroing in is around what it means to rebuild and sort of make more resilient the supply chains that connect the Asia Pacific region. Obviously, as we saw coming out of the pandemic, the strains on those supply chains were quite considerable. Those strains had pretty dramatic ramifications for every economy in the Asia Pacific, every economy around the world. And I think having learned that lesson, having seen the ramifications that can transpire, I think that's one sort of concrete place where, certainly the United States, but I think APEC economies as a whole say, well, we've got to take steps to improve supply chains in the region, precisely because we learned a set of hard lessons around the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic around just how disruptive this can be economically if we don't have our supply chains on very firm footing. So I'd say that in particular, I think is going to be one place that has gotten, just in the 3 days we've been here in Honolulu, but I think as we roll the clock forward across the course of our host year, going to get a lot of attention about what we can do to build the regional economy on a stronger footing, having learned the lessons that we learned in the pandemic and coming out of it.
Yep. If I can just add, one of the things that we found was very useful was the collaboration that we saw among the customs authorities during the pandemic. The ability of the customs authorities to quickly come together and ensure that we deal with at the border issues so that we could have the flow of medical devices and essential goods throughout the pandemic. So that for me was a very important deliverable during the pandemic, because you need to have us work collaboratively. No one economy could have handled such a situation if you have the products, if you have the essential goods, but you cannot get them across the border, that defeats the whole purpose. So that was one major outcome from the collaboration among our customs authorities in APEC. So issuing guidelines on how to facilitate the flow of essential goods and medical devices was one key takeaway key lesson that we learned from the pandemic. And going forward, and this has been on our agenda, structural reform is key in our agenda, and we will see that continuing throughout the years to ensure that we facilitate trade and investment in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca and Mike. Now our next question is for Matt from Julia Steele in Vancouver, Canada. What are the main policy initiatives that the U.S. is hoping to accomplish during its year as APEC host? And since APEC decision-making is by non-binding consensus among all the members, how do you plan to accomplish those?
No, thanks very much. And I was very privileged to have the opportunity to travel to Vancouver earlier this year for an APEC Business Advisory Council meeting. And it was great to get a better understanding as well of some of the challenges and opportunities that you have in that part of the world and that part of the region. I think I mentioned earlier that our theme for our host year will be creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. We then have sort of three priority areas that Mike has mentioned: interconnected, innovative, and inclusive. And one of the things that we did today with the other economies was run through what we're talking about when we're talking about each of these priority areas. So, for example, under interconnected, that's work on supply chain resilience, which we've talked about, digital trade, connectivity, and also expanding opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises. On the innovation side, we're looking at focus on solutions for the climate change crisis and environmental sustainability, food security, good regulatory practices, health, anti-corruption, digitalization, and fostering an enabling environment. And then under inclusive, APEC in the United States in 2011, we launched work on women's economic empowerment, which we want to continue and strengthen, but then also working with other communities with untapped economic potential, and including from underserved and underrepresented communities. So the point about it being a consensus-based, non-binding organization, one of the things we see with APEC, and I'm really excited to work here as a U.S. senior official because I've worked with APEC before, and I think we see great potential for APEC because it's really in APEC's, DNA to be a place where it can be a difference maker. The members account for nearly half of all global trade. It does have strong linkages to the private sector and other stakeholders. Its work streams include and integrate technical experts. And, as you said, the consensus-based non-binding nature, it also enables some creative solutions for our leaders to advance open, free, and fair economic policy by essentially getting us together to be creative and to talk about ways that that we might be able to be an incubator for good ideas across the region. And so I think it's been an extraordinarily great year with Thailand hosting. We're looking forward to our host year and seeing how we can work in that kind of environment in a place where we still see a real opportunity to be able to cooperate with each other and move forward to accomplish some of these objectives through meetings at the technical working group level, all the way up to the senior officials level, to the ministerial level, and then finally in November up to the leaders level. And we'll have a very strong agenda throughout the year in which we're planning to do that.
Thank you, Matt. Our next question is for Dr. Santa Maria from Akemi Higa, a foreign affairs blogger in Tokyo. What is your sense of what other member economies are looking for from the U.S. as a host this year?
Thank you very much for that question. I think we're looking to the U.S. for leadership, of course, so as we push through these very challenging times. How will the U.S. leaders to make sure that APEC provides the necessary tailwinds to all our members as we work through these challenges? Also, what we've learned over the years is that when you have a situation like this, you need more collaboration, more multilateral cooperation rather than less, because of the very nature of the crisis that we're facing. So we're all looking to see how to work very closely with the US and to ensure that we all come out of these crises in better shape than when we went in this year.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So it looks like, we have other questions that were sent to us, but our time is, our 30 minutes is ended. And it looks like this was really our final question, unless there are any burning ones that anybody wants to raise their hand. So, we will be forwarding any unanswered questions from the chat to the US delegation, as well as the APEC Secretariat press contacts for possible follow-up. And we're placing their contact emails in the chat if you want to get in touch with them. So I really want to thank Mike, Matt, and Dr. Rebecca for your leadership and everything that you do to ensure that we are working together cooperatively. And we're really so very grateful that you decided to choose Honolulu, Hawaii as the beginning of the US APEC host year. So mahalo nui loa, and thank you all for joining us online. And again, you can follow up and find the recording on YouTube. Mahalo.